We have spent loads of time talking about how tough the world is, how misty the windshield is, how difficult things can be. I want to change tone totally this week. As we come into land, we're going to talk about the things your heart needs to get really good at. We've spoken about what you must sort of protect it against, but how would you cultivate good things inside there? So use your imagination with me for a second, if you will. Cast your mind to the last wedding you've ever been to. Or if you've not ever been to a wedding, then think about a movie where you saw one and kind of imagine it. There's been this amazing day. The ceremony's gone off without a hitch. The bride looks beautiful. The whole kind of day just feels infused with all this romance and special meaning. And you end up in the reception venue towards the end of the wedding day. And huge amounts of effort have been gone to. There's this incredible kind of spread laid out. The tables look awesome. And there's a sense of anticipation. We're going to get to the speeches. And there's a sense of anticipation / terror because speeches can sometimes go badly. But the idea, certainly what you're hoping for when you're at the wedding, is that this is going to be this moment where these people are honored, where we're going to hear from the dads and the friends and maybe each of them as they honor one another and give this really beautiful, really loving picture of these two people. They're kind of idealistic, this is the best version of you that we see speech. And then the best man gets up. And something terrible has happened in society where the best man half thinks he's supposed to honor the groom, but the other half of him thinks he's supposed to tell a bunch of ridiculous, unfunny jokes. And so he gets up to talk about his mate and will probably say something along the lines of, you're a really great guy when you're not drunk, but speaking of when you were drunk, and then start telling some story that the mother of the bride just has never even heard that boys do stuff like that. And it's this weird, awkward moment where essentially what's going on is someone has been given the opportunity to honor another human being, to compliment them. And human beings are not good at doing this. Guys particularly are really bad at paying compliments. You feel so vulnerable in that moment when you're going to pay a compliment. And all the rest of us are just cringing as we watch this Muppet try to pay a compliment to his friend. And his friend is probably half crawling under the table because we're really bad at paying compliments and we have no idea how to receive them. I don't know if you've noticed that. I remember running a men's weekend away. Some of you watching this might have even been at that men's weekend. And I got it in my head that I needed to try to shift the culture and tone of the weekend. Because us guys, I think like most groups of guys, when you get them together, have this thing called the love language of abuse. It's the one extra love language that Gary Chapman never heard about and guys believe in. And it's like, if I mock you wittily enough, it somehow communicates affection to you. And I don't know, maybe some of you do have that love language, but for the most part, this kind of rough and tumble way of ripping each other off is really a way of hiding. We do want to let each other know that we care and that we're keen for friendship, but we're just a little afraid to make ourselves vulnerable. And so I remember standing up at the beginning of this weekend, wanting to tell all the guys, hey, for the next little while, let's not rip each other off. Well, how about that? Let's just try to avoid all this mocking that we normally do. And imagine if we could be brave enough, really manly enough, testosterone-filled enough, courageous enough to actually pay some compliments to one another. And it was just, you could have heard a pin drop. The whole room was just like, who is this maniac that has beamed down from Mars into our midst? Compliments. You've got to be kidding. Not mock one another on a boys' weekend. What are we going to talk about then? Half the guys in the room, I think, literally had no plan for conversation for the rest of that weekend if mocking was off the table. And I remember in the silence, a very dear friend of mine who's now actually on the eldership team of the Kloof Church that I lead, in this kind of silent, awkward moment while a bunch of guys were being told to try and compliment one another and all just thinking how foreign this sounded. He, in his wisdom, noticed that I was wearing a maybe slightly unwisely short pair of shorts. And in the silence in this room of about 100 men said, "Hey, Paul, nice legs." I was like, that is not the compliment I had in mind. That's not really a compliment at all, but it was cunning and technically the right thing. The point of all of this is that a compliment, really most beautifully described, is actually a celebration of another person. It's a moment where we pause to celebrate and wonder at the glory inside another human heart. And when you put it like that, it can sound like quite a daunting thing to do because we feel super vulnerable when we wonder at something, when we glory at something, particularly at someone else, when we see the fingerprints of God in someone and just are prepared to pause for a moment and celebrate them. or celebrate anything for that matter. A wonderful sunrise, a really funny joke. Anytime you are prepared to let other people know that you are celebrating something other than yourself, you're going to pause from your boasting and your bragging and your sort of shoring up your image for a moment and just wonder at something else. You feel like you leave yourself way open, way exposed to admit to everyone else that I think this thing is wonderful or funny or beautiful or interesting or clever. Sets me up for the moment where you go, yeah, not so much. And that leaves me feeling shamed. Here's the problem though. Your heart desperately needs to celebrate. Your heart was designed to live in a sense of awe, to wonder at things, to find things just transport you into a place of fantasy almost. This world was designed to be thrilling. And we were designed to not only celebrate what we see out there and things that happen to us, but also to see the hand of God inside each other, to see the image of God inside one another. I mean, that's the crazy truth, that you and I and everyone else you've ever met, despite their socioeconomic standing or race or gender or anything else that you might put on them, was actually designed in the image of God. That if you look carefully enough at them, you can see God. And you were designed to celebrate them. And that would probably end up looking like paying them compliments. And yet we just find that too difficult to do. Being in a sort of state of celebration feels like it leaves us too vulnerable. And so we replace it. We replace it with other cheap versions of celebration. I love sport as much as the next person. I find watching unscripted sport just so exciting. But I think part of why it is such a drug for our generation is because it gives me this opportunity to do something I was designed to do, to celebrate, in a kind of fake, cheapened way. And you would never call sport cheap when you know what the guys get paid. But essentially it is that. It's not real life. It's close to, it mimics real life, but it's not really. And so we end up celebrating, yay, Man United did this. No, we never celebrate Man United. As a theological fact, you should never celebrate Man United for anything. But we'll celebrate that thing because it's like a part of me was living through these guys and something wonderful has happened. Or we'll watch a series or watch some other person going off on an adventure and YouTubing about it. And we'll live vicariously through that stuff and celebrate some fictional victory. Because it's just safer if I keep it distant from myself. If I were to actually go on the adventure myself, absolutely celebrating my life, if I was prepared to admit to my friends I see something beautiful in them, or saw something beautiful on the way to work, or heard something astounding that I'm in awe of, if I was to admit that and let people know, hey, I'm actually celebrating live, in real life, I'll open myself up to be mocked. And the other reason that we struggle to celebrate is because in fact we've believed that the cynic, the critic, the person who says, oh no, that's not actually such new information. Oh no, that's not actually so funny. Oh no, well, you think that band is great, actually this band is great. The person who does that seems to be the one who's more mature. We think it's more grown up to lower our expectations and to be able to, with that sort of jaded, been there, done that t-shirt, say, oh, you think that's great? Well, shame, that's a bit naive. Have you believed that? Have you at some point settled for the idea that celebrating, that just being optimistic, that just seeing the beauty in something simple, that's naive and childlike? And the person who sees the problems or who is able to help naive people realize how bad life actually is, that's the wise, mature person. Perhaps you've believed that God is like that. Perhaps you've grown up thinking that God is a bit of a grumpy, dour, sort of down in the corner of the mouth, headmaster type. Many legalistic Christians have grown up thinking God already knows how messed up we are and is just looking forward to reminding us of that. But if it turns out that we are designed to celebrate, it's also amazing to discover that God loves to celebrate, that his heart is as celebrating as a little kid's in some ways, that we've grown up and thought that our hearts are getting so old and mature. Actually, they're getting old and tired. And in quite an important way, I think God's heart is quite a lot younger than ours. I think God celebrates stuff without feeling worried that he might get mocked for it or bored because he's seen that same beautiful thing 5 times over. I think he celebrates it every time. Let me show you a few scriptures that prove this. It's Genesis. God has just finished creating the world. And in Genesis 1, verse 31, he looks at everything he's made. And it says, and God saw that it was good. And the very last verse says, and he saw that it was very good. The trouble with reading an English Bible is that then you think you have an English God. God is not English. Because the English would describe tea as very good. English like to go caravanning and take out their toilet effluent and pour it out and go, yeah, I had a very good holiday. That is not the kind of very good that God is talking about when he uses that word. The original word there is tov miod, which means exceptional, incredible, powerfully, emotionally affecting good. It's the kind of good that makes pleasure pale into insignificance. That's the kind of very good that God is talking about when he sees the world. He's just blown away by how beautiful this earth is. And he doesn't feel ashamed to admit it. Well, how about you? Zephaniah 3 says he will rejoice over you, which really means he will spin around in giddy wonder over you. He dances over you and rejoices with singing. God doesn't seem very English. He doesn't seem very stiff upper lip. God seems to believe in celebrating. Matthew 18 goes like this: I tell you the truth, unless you change and become like little children, you'll never enter the kingdom of God. God is, I think, keen for us to get younger hearts, not these old, jaded, cynical hearts that we have. It's God himself who inspired the psalmist to write this. The heavens proclaim the glory of God. The skies display his craftsmanship. Day after day, they continue to speak. Night after night, they make him known. They speak without a sound or word. Their voice is never heard, and yet their message has gone throughout the earth and their words to all the world. Listen to the language here that God is choosing to use about the sky, which he's seen every day. The number of sunrises that God has seen. It's amazing to me that he'll still speak like this. God has made his home in the heavens. And the sun bursts forth like a radiant bridegroom after his wedding. It rejoices like a great athlete, eager to run the race through the heavens every day. The sun rises at one end of the heavens and follows its course to the other end, and nothing can hide from its heat. And I think children are quite good at doing this. Children are quite good at going, again, spin me around again, Dad, throw the ball again. Children don't feel embarrassed about saying, that's just wonderful. It seems like God is the same. He just looks at these beautiful things and goes, they're amazing. He looks at you and rejoices over you with singing. He put a heart inside you that was designed to do the same. Okay, so my heart is supposed to celebrate. I need to get better at doing this. Well, one of the things you can do is just start to pay attention. You would assume that driving in traffic every day is the last place you could possibly celebrate. I've been trying to celebrate almost as a discipline. If I'm told to guard my heart and feed it and care for it, then I need to practice celebrating. And so I was sitting in the car the other day driving to work, and normally I'd be muttering and grumbling and being frustrated because I'm supposed to get to work so I can be productive because everything's supposed to be efficient. But I sat in the car and realized this seat was designed by some German, probably for the whole of his life, to make it as perfect and ergonomically sound as possible. And a car seat is a pretty comfortable place to be when you think that you could be riding a horse or walking or carrying water. And having realized, wow, some man or woman or team of them made in the image of God, worked hard to create this marvel of engineering that I'm sitting in, that can play music and air condition me. And then I look out the window and see a bird doing whatever a bird does. And clouds. God didn't have to design the clouds to look just like they do. And I noticed the fact that actually there are colors, a crazy number of colors. God could have made the world in grays. And some of the hipsters might have liked that because grayscale seems so cool, but he didn't. God made emerald greens and pinks and mauves and everything else, and textures. God didn't have to make air smell the way it smells just before the rain arrives. Do you think it's an accident that sitting next to the sea and listening to the wind go through the trees and the waves crashing, you think it's an accident that that sounds so great? God could have made things sound very lame compared to the way they do sound. Do you think it's an accident that God gave you all the unique taste buds that you have, which allow you to taste flavors and get that zap that you get from something sour and being able to move things around in your mouth and experience all sorts of different things? The whole wine industry is built on the idea that God gave you crazy senses. Do you think falling in love had to feel as wonderful and intimate and terrifying and amazing as that? No, God designed it that way. He could have given you 5 muscles for your face. Instead, he gave us enough muscles that someone like Rowan Atkinson is possible. And as I was driving to work and looking at the beautiful people in the cars around me, all filled with the image of God, I realized there is stuff to celebrate all the time, every day. If I'll be childlike enough, unashamed enough, vulnerable enough to admit it. To admit that something is wonderful is essentially to admit that someone else is God. That someone more creative and more wonderful than you came up with something that you could never have come up with, and that you are his biggest fan. That's what's so important about celebration. That's why your heart needs it. Your heart was designed to reflect glory to someone amazing. And we've grown old. Maybe not physically, but our hearts grow old. And we are no longer unashamedly God's biggest fan. And therefore, we're no longer prepared to go on wonderful adventures firsthand and celebrate them and experience His goodness. It leaves us in this sad situation where we watch fake adventures going on and we see someone else's victories as things to celebrate on a sports field, as opposed to realizing every day of your life, every breath that you take, every complex thought that you're able to have, every opportunity you get to go to work and do something wonderful and get home at the end of the day and just like your Father in heaven say, I created something and it's very good. The opportunity to watch all the complexities of this earth going on in the way that they do, in all their beauty and all their splendor and all their varied, unusual, unexpected surprises. That as I do that, and as I am silly enough to admit to other people, that just gave me an opportunity to marvel. That's given me a sense of awe. I'm in an absolute state of wonder at that. As you do that, you are admitting that you are not God, that someone far more amazing than you is, and that you are His biggest fan. And that is what your heart longs to do all day long. And so you're going to have a conversation now about when last you felt crazy amounts of awe and wonder, and how you're going to pay more attention to this amazing life that you're in, this wonderful life that you live, and find ways to celebrate all the time. I'm aware that some of us are in pain from time to time, and we'll talk about what to do when our hearts can't even get from -10 to 0 next week. But for now, let's imagine that even if there is complicated, difficult stuff going on in the world, let's just start at 0 and go, I need to celebrate. Celebrating is good for my heart. It's the most God-honoring thing that you can do.